Hey everybody, this is Adam from Rescue Michigan, and in this video I just want to talk a little bit about the race for governor, which today had, I guess, not so much a shakeup because he didn't actually announce, but today in Jackson, Michigan, James Craig, former police chief for the city of Detroit, gave a speech called "Why I Am a Republican," and he is widely assumed, in fact, he is absolutely certain to be the Republican establishment's pick for governor in the upcoming race against Gretchen Whitmer. There is no question about that, and his speech today certainly left no doubt about that. He was flanked by many Republican lawmakers. He was introduced by Senate Majority Leader Mike Shirkey. He was after the speech, the chairman of the state party and co-chair Ron Weiser and Michonne Maddock came up on stage. There is no question the Republican Party is backing him for governor in a race that's already had several other candidates enter the race. And by the way, as far as that goes, several of the other candidates have certainly given strong statements on policy questions. My question for all of them, which so far none of them have been able to answer successfully, is, do you have a couple $1 million laying around? Because if you don't have the resources to run for governor of Michigan. And that's just a fact, folks. I'm sorry. That's not the way it should be, but that's the way it is. And barring that, clearly the Republican Party is banking on James Craig to be their standard bearer against Gretchen Whitmer. So I went out to Jackson, Michigan today, where he gave a speech. He stopped short of announcing that he was going to actually run for governor. It was not an announcement speech, but it was a speech entitled "Why I Am a Republican." And clearly what he is doing is attempting to establish his credentials as a genuine conservative to run for governor as our nominee for governor of Michigan in the next election. So I would just say, first off, just generally speaking, it was not an impressive speech. It had no failings. I'll put it that way. He didn't say anything horrible, but it wasn't what he said so much as what he did not say. So just real briefly, I'll bring up this article that's just kind of covering this. Former Detroit police chief slams victimhood mentality at birthplace of Michigan GOP. The speech he gave, it was read from a teleprompter. I mean, you can even see the teleprompter in the photo here, clearly from political consultants. And that's all fine, but it just goes to show not just what his personal beliefs are, but also what his campaign message will be. And here's where I think we need to be concerned. Now, look, don't get me wrong here. I want to support James Craig for governor, because if he's not qualified to be governor as a serious Republican conservative, but the establishment backs him anyway, then we've got a problem. And that's a fight I'd prefer not to have. So I really want this guy to be a true conservative standard bearer. But we have to ask some questions about this, especially because the last Republican governor turned out to be a total phony who spent the entire last couple of years of his administration bad-mouthing, trashing, and attacking the actual Republican conservative standard bearer, President Donald Trump, and that would be Rick Snyder, who was, at the time when he ran for office, positioning himself as an outsider, just as James Craig is doing now. Rick Snyder ran as an outsider, and the problem with being an outsider is that you don't have a record to run on. You don't, and that's a blessing and a curse, of course. You know, if you're a Republican lawmaker, chances are you have to make compromises here or there. Every vote can be used against you, and I get all that, but when you're an outsider, you have to be able to give people real assurance, real confidence that you're a genuine Republican. And in this speech, he was, I guess, already on defense, entitling the speech "Why I Am a Republican." And so as you see in the news coverage here, he says, "I'll defend our police, not defund them." And what do you expect? He's a former police officer, former police chief. Of course, he will run on that. But what about the other questions that matter to conservatives? What about gun rights? What about abortion? What about the lockdowns? And probably most of all, what about Donald Trump? And on that, actually in all these questions, he had very, very little to say. It was like checking off boxes. So he said the only thing he said in this entire speech about Donald Trump was, "I voted for him twice," something we can't verify. Although notably in the article, they do actually. This is of course the Detroit Free Press. They're totally left wing, and they actually, I think, quote here somewhere. Let's see here. Grebner. Let's see here. Grebner is also a left-wing political consultant, so he's got access to all the vote history and all that stuff. And they note here in this article, when President Donald Trump praised him in a local TV interview, Craig said he claims no party, but aligns with, quote, both conservatives and liberals depending on the issues. Now, that might be okay for someone to say as a police chief. Sure, I'm an independent, but in light of the fact that you are soon to be a candidate for governor, I'd be curious to know what issues you claim to align with liberals on. That's an important question. That's a question that ought to be addressed. Here's the quote I was looking for. This is from Mark Grebner of the left-wing practical political consulting firm, noting that he did indeed vote Republican in both the 2016 and 2020 presidential primaries. So they did check on that. And yes, he did actually vote Republican. And that's all well and good. But on the big issues, number one, he said nothing in any real defense of Donald Trump in light of everything that's happened over the past year. And he said nothing, almost nothing, about the lockdowns in general. He said, we rejected kings and queens in 1776. And so, obviously alluding to the suggestion that Gretchen Whitmer was acting as a queen when she destroyed our state's economy and destroyed our personal freedom. Although he said nothing about destroying our economy and destroying personal freedom. The most he said was, we want our small businesses open. And that was basically it. That's not much to say for the most radical takeaway of civil liberties in our state's history. On abortion, he said the one thing that I take to be a statement that you're not pro-life, which is, he said, I am pro-life. And that's all he said. And that's not how pro-lifers speak. Pro-lifers say things like, that's a baby in the womb with a soul. Pro-lifers say abortion is murder. Now, not every pro-life politician will say that. I understand that's a controversial statement. That's a way of phrasing it. But my point is, when you are pro-life, you speak from a certain passion about the issue. You would say something like, abortion has killed 50 million people in this country, mostly black children. A black candidate might say that if he was genuinely pro-life. He would capitalize on that issue. He said nothing of the sort. I am pro-life is what people who are not pro-life say to easily duped people into thinking they're pro-life. Same thing on gun rights. He went a little further on gun rights. He said, I am pro-Second Amendment. And again, that's not what people that care about gun rights say. People who care about gun rights say things like, your right to self-defense is your inalienable personal right. And the Second Amendment is your ability to defend yourself. Something the government cannot do for you, right? That's how someone who's pro-Second Amendment talks. He didn't say that. He does say, he said, here's the quote, it was his responsibility to approve concealed pistol licenses, and he began to recognize what he said was a positive impact on concealed carry, that positive impact concealed carry had on crime prevention in Portland, Maine. Now, folks, I don't know that Portland, Maine was exactly an epicenter for violent crime. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's not. Strange he wouldn't talk about violent crime in Detroit being police chief. So he says, I carry here today and I carry until I die. Yeah, but you're a cop. You get to do that. The average citizen doesn't. And that's why it's important to enunciate that the right to self-defense, the right to bear arms is the right to self-defense. And that's the only thing that people have in an emergency. Because when every second counts, police take minutes. And he didn't say anything like that. So, yeah, that's all, folks. That was his speech today. It was a lot of pablum, a lot of, You know, why would I saw, and I heard Maxine Waters disparage the police at an event, and so I learned I didn't like her. Doesn't make you a Republican, but that was his example. And here's the quote in the article about that right there. You know, and this is the problem we have. I mean, it's great if he's a black candidate running as a police officer who's going to talk about defending the police, but this is far from the only issue that's important to conservatives. And the big question we have is, if we donate our time, talent, and treasure to get you elected governor and drag you over the finish line, what assurances do we have that you're not going to be a turncoat like Rick Snyder was? I mean, the primary legacy of Rick Snyder was governing by spite. I mean, even his big accomplishment for conservatives, the right to work law that he signed, that was the product of spite. The Democrats the Democrats and the unions tried to overturn his emergency manager law, and they failed. And out of spite, he signed right to work into law. And of course, he was absolutely vile towards Donald Trump. The big theme in this speech was unity. We got to unify. We got to unify. We got to unify. And I, for one, am tired of hearing this from the establishment whenever their guys get the nomination. But when Donald Trump got the nomination, where was the Republican establishment then? Paul Ryan, the Speaker of the House, refused to endorse him. Rick Snyder, the governor of Michigan, refused to endorse him. It was like water running upwards. So much for unity. The guy who's at the top of the ticket, you won't endorse. Paul Ryan, his number one job was ensuring Republicans held a majority in the U.S. House of Representatives. And he didn't hesitate to sow discord and distrust among Republican voters. He wanted Trump to lose. He wanted Trump to lose so that they could defeat the Trump agenda and the MAGA supporters and say, if you guys listen to these people, you'll never win another election again. And Trump won anyway. So I'm not necessarily willing to buy the we all need to unify argument until you start making some strong statements on the big issues. He said nothing about cynical racist theory being taught in our schools. He said nothing about schools at all, by the way. I don't think. I can't recall anything he said about schools and the indoctrination happening. Nothing about free speech on social media. Nothing about free speech in general, in fact. Nothing about the political prisoners being held in Washington right now to this day. You think a police officer would have some things to say about the state of law and justice in this country? He had very little to say. He had nothing to say on any of these things. Nothing. It was pablum. And look, folks, maybe in his heart of hearts, he harbors these conservative beliefs, and his campaign is directing him not to say them, to play it safe. But the reality is, this is why Republicans lose elections, because they don't defend their issues. They listen to their consultants, and they trust the pollsters. When Gretchen Whitmer locked down our state last year and created the most devastating impact of anything any governor's ever done in our state's history, destroying our small businesses, destroying people's lives, getting people addicted to drugs, causing people to die from isolation, what they did to people's families, what they did to seniors. Republicans said nothing. You know why? Because their consultants said, Gretchen Whitmer's popular. And the Republicans didn't understand their role wasn't to go along with public opinion. It was to shape public opinion. It was to take on the governor's lies, to take on the governor's deprivation of our civil liberties. So if that's the kind of campaign that James Craig's going to run, we're going to have a tough time next year. So I hope you guys encourage him to be a little stronger, to show a little spine. Obviously, there are some issues out there where going all the way to the far right is tough. I get that. I mean, I mentioned earlier, saying things like abortion is murder, that's too far politically. I get that. But show the Republicans you have real, sincere thoughts behind your beliefs. And maybe if you say them enough times, you actually will. Because if you do become governor, we actually want a conservative who actually will fight for our values and actually will put the other side on defense. Not like these legislators who are allowing and abetting the Democrats to go on offense against us and demoralize and divide us. So if you want to unify our party, embrace our values and defend them. That's all I've got for today, folks. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to see more of this content, please leave a comment. Let me know what you think. It helps. Share, subscribe these videos. Sign up at rescuemichigan.com because we've got everything on the line next year. And we're all about empowering people with the ability to make a real difference in their own communities, in your own communities. Get your precinct voter file. Knock on some doors. Help us change Michigan. Help us rescue Michigan. Because our state's in very great difficulty right now. And in politics, leaders come last. The politicians won't start embracing their values until we start demanding they do, and criticizing them, and not supporting them until they do. So James Craig, he gave a lot of nice pablum, not a lot of great rhetoric, but very little of substance. He's got a long way to go. I hope he'll actually start going further, because we don't have a lot of time. Thanks, everybody. Again, like, share, subscribe, sign up at rescuemichigan.com, and we'll be chatting again soon because we've got a lot of news to cover. Lots happened the past week, and you'll be hearing from us again soon. So thanks, everybody, for all that you do for liberty. Peace.